Hi, my name is Julia Bush, and this is my presentation for Lab 2. The goal of this lab was similar to Lab 1. We were observing the effects of electric charge, force, and fields on a piece of tape by another piece of charge tape. But unlike last lab, our model was more complex and considered the whole length of the tape, as opposed to treating it as a singular point charge. And as a summary of my findings, while my measurements were very similar to Lab 1, my coding ended up looking very different, and I ended up with a more realistic representation of electric force and the electric charge of the piece of tape. So some basic measurements I found in this lab were that one piece of tape was approximately 0.2 meters long, and the mass was approximately 0.2 grams for each piece of tape, and the piece of tape on top began to float above the bottom piece of tape when they were approximately 0.05 meters apart from each other. And the electric force and gravitational force acting on the tape were equal and opposite, so they ended up being about 0.002 newtons each. And then here's a picture of the code I ended up with, just part of it, but here's the model to the left that I ended up rendering with the code. So the white force represents the electric force that the bottom tape causes onto the top tape, and the yellow arrow represents the gravity that the top tape experiences, and then these green arrows represent the electric field that the top tape experiences given the electric charge of the bottom tape. And we found this instead of just by treating it as a single point, acting on a single point. We took each particle in the top tape and looking at each particle on the bottom tape's effect onto that top particle for each particle in the line of tape. So I ended up that each force equal to about 1.9 times 10 to the negative 3 newtons. And I adjusted the scale and the charge until they were equal. So the charge I ended up with for this lab was 3.786 times 10 to the negative 8 coulombs, and this is slightly different than what I found for the charge of a piece of tape in the first lab, which was 2.33 times 10 to the negative 7th power coulombs. So some closing thoughts and answering some of the closing questions that were given for this lab. Is that we did not treat the tapes as point charges in this week's lab, so we made sure to take small pieces of the charge and small pieces of the length to more accurately make a picture of how the electric field affects it of the bottom tape onto the top tape. And we did make some assumptions in this lab. For example, we ignored air resistance on the tape, and we did assume that the charge was evenly distributed in the object when we were taking the sections of it in the code represented by the variable n. And then I found approximately for a single point charge estimate, like we found last week, like I mentioned, it was slightly bigger than the line charge estimate for charge, so 2.33 times 10 to the negative 7th, as opposed to the line charge estimate, which was 3.786 times 10 to the negative 8th power. And that's all I have for this lab. So thanks for listening.